The restaurant was warm, golden, and filled with quiet laughter, the kind of place where people celebrated milestones and rare moments of peace. At a corner table near the window sat a tired-looking man in his late 30s, wearing a simple shirt and an old jacket that had clearly seen better days. Across from him sat an elderly man with gentle eyes and silver hair, smiling softly as they shared a quiet meal. For the first time in nearly a decade, the younger man allowed himself to relax. He laughed quietly, lifted his glass, and for a brief moment forgot the heavy weight of responsibility he had carried alone for 9 long years. What he didn't know was that someone from his office had just taken a photo, and by the next morning that photo would cost him his job. Before we continue this emotional story, take a quick moment. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us what truly matters, please like this video, share it with someone who needs inspiration today, and subscribe to the channel Kindness. Also tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Your support helps spread more stories that touch hearts around the world. The man's name was Daniel Carter. For 9 years, Daniel had lived a life that most people around him never truly noticed. He worked long hours as a junior financial analyst at a large corporate firm. He arrived before sunrise, left long after sunset, and rarely took breaks. His co-workers often joked that Daniel was married to his desk, but the truth was much heavier than they realized. 9 years earlier, Daniel's world had collapsed overnight. His wife had passed away suddenly after a brief illness, leaving him alone with their newborn daughter, Lily. In a single moment, Daniel had become both mother and father. Sleep became a luxury he rarely experienced. Bills stacked up faster than his paycheck could keep up. But quitting was never an option. His daughter depended on him, so Daniel built a routine that revolved entirely around survival. Every morning he woke before dawn, prepared Lily for daycare, dropped her off, rushed to work, and pushed through long days filled with spreadsheets and deadlines. After work, he would pick her up, cook dinner, clean the tiny apartment, and collapse into bed only to repeat the same cycle again. In 9 years, Daniel had never taken a real holiday. Not once. Every vacation day he accumulated was quietly used when Lily got sick, when daycare closed unexpectedly, or when life simply became too overwhelming. While his co-workers traveled to beaches and mountains, Daniel stayed behind, working overtime and saving every dollar he could for Lily's future. But something changed that week. Lily had just turned 9 years old, and she had made a small request that stopped Daniel in his tracks. She had asked him why they never celebrated anything the way other families did, why they never went out to dinner or took a trip like the parents of her friends. Daniel had smiled gently and told her that one day they would. Then that same evening, he received a phone call that shocked him. An elderly man named Robert Hayes had asked to meet him for dinner. Robert Hayes wasn't a stranger. He had once been Daniel's college professor many years earlier, the one person who believed in Daniel's potential when Daniel himself had nearly given up. They had lost contact over time, but Robert had recently reached out after hearing about the struggles Daniel had faced after his wife's death. He insisted they meet. At first, Daniel hesitated. Taking an evening off felt almost irresponsible after years of constant work. But something inside him whispered that maybe, just this once, it was okay to pause. So for the first time in 9 years, Daniel allowed himself a small break. That evening he sat in the restaurant across from Robert Hayes, the mentor who had once guided him through the hardest years of his education. They talked about life, about Lily, about the long road Daniel had walked alone. Robert listened carefully, his expression thoughtful and proud. But across the restaurant, someone else was watching. Karen Mitchell, Daniel's boss, had just walked in for dinner with colleagues from another department. Karen was known throughout the company for her strict leadership style. She believed discipline created success, and she had little patience for employees she believed lacked commitment. When her eyes landed on Daniel sitting comfortably in the restaurant, laughing and raising a glass, her expression hardened instantly. She had no idea who the elderly man was. All she saw was an employee who had recently declined a last-minute overtime assignment, claiming he had personal responsibilities. To her, the scene looked like dishonesty, and when one of her colleagues quietly took a photo and showed it to her, Karen felt her suspicion confirmed. The next morning, Daniel walked into the office expecting another ordinary day of work. Instead, he was called into Karen's office within minutes of arriving. The room felt colder than usual as she placed the printed photo on her desk. Daniel stared at it in confusion as Karen's voice cut through the silence. She spoke about dedication, honesty, and how unacceptable it was for employees to lie about responsibilities while enjoying personal leisure. Daniel tried to explain, but Karen had already made her decision. After 9 years of loyal work, Daniel Carter was fired. The words hit him like a sudden storm. He walked out of the building in silence, holding a small box containing the few personal items from his desk. As he stepped outside into the bright daylight, the weight of the moment pressed heavily against his chest. His job had been the fragile foundation that held his life together. Without it, everything felt uncertain. But Daniel's greatest fear wasn't for himself, it was for Lily. That evening, Daniel sat quietly in their small apartment while Lily worked on her homework at the kitchen table. He watched her laugh at something she read, completely unaware that their lives had just changed dramatically. Daniel forced a smile, determined not to let his fear show. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Daniel received another call. It was Robert Hayes. When Daniel told him what had happened, the line fell silent for several seconds. Then Robert asked a simple question that Daniel hadn't expected. "Did your boss ask who you were having dinner with?" Daniel admitted she hadn't. Robert sighed softly, his voice calm but firm. What Karen Mitchell didn't know was that Robert Hayes wasn't just a retired professor. He was also the founder of one of the largest investment firms in the region, and one of the biggest financial partners of Daniel's former company. The next morning, Karen Mitchell arrived at the office expecting another routine day of managing reports and meetings. Instead, she was informed that Robert Hayes himself had scheduled an emergency meeting with the company's executive leadership. Within hours, the story of what had happened to Daniel Carter spread quietly through the upper levels of management. Executives realized they had just fired an employee who had worked tirelessly for nearly a decade, all while raising a child alone, and who happened to be personally known by one of their most influential partners. By the afternoon, Karen was called into a meeting she would never forget. But Daniel knew nothing about any of this. He spent the day sending job applications, updating his resume, and quietly searching for any opportunity that might help him support his daughter. Late that evening, there was a knock at his apartment door. When Daniel opened it, he froze. Standing there was Robert Hayes. The elderly man smiled warmly and stepped inside, holding a folder in his hands. Inside that folder was something Daniel never expected, an offer. Robert had been quietly building a new mentorship program within his investment firm, designed to support hardworking professionals who had been overlooked or underestimated. After hearing Daniel's story, he had already made a decision. He wanted Daniel to join the firm, not as a junior employee, but as the director of the very program Robert was launching. Daniel stared at the offer in disbelief. After years of feeling invisible, years of struggling quietly without recognition, someone had finally seen his strength, his resilience, and the character he had built through hardship. Tears filled his eyes as he realized that the worst moment of his career had just opened the door to something far greater. Before we reach the end of this story, we want to ask something special from you. If this story is touching your heart, please comment the word kindness below. It helps us know that these stories are reaching people who believe compassion can change lives. Weeks later, Daniel walked into his new office for the first day of a career he never imagined possible. The view from the building overlooked the entire city, and for the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. That evening, he took Lily out to dinner at a small restaurant. As they sat together laughing, Daniel realized something important. Losing his